George, what will be your first priority when you'll be Mayor for London?
Well, housing is the first priority, but that'll take a bit longer. So I guess the first thing that I'll do is send Max Kaiser into the City of London to tell the City of London Corporation, the party is over. The party is over.
Yeah. Excellent idea.
Though he'll say it a bit more roughly than me. Max is, because he's an American, in favor of capital punishment. He wants to put them at the traitor's gate. I favor life imprisonment without any possibility of parole.
Why can't justice be fun?
It's an interesting one. Politics, in general has failed. So what makes you think you'll succeed?
Well, the mainstream political parties have failed. The three cheeks of the same arse have failed. And that's why fewer and fewer people vote for them. It's why people search around. In Scotland, a tsunami has just wiped out the Labour Party, which when I was the chairman of the Labour Party in Scotland was completely unassailable. It was incomprehensible when I was the 26-year-old chairman of the Labour Party in Scotland that the day would ever come when we would be challenged by anyone. But Tony Blair and the Iraq War and Gordon Brown and the neoliberal economics, the Thatcherism that they came to stand for, was just swept away. And 1 million people voted for the Greens in the general election. The idea that the answer is to get all aspirational, whatever that means, as if poor people are not aspirational. Although sometimes their aspiration is to have something to put on the table for their children that night. That's aspiration too, you know. That's aspiration. The idea that if you become more like Tony Blair, the people who just wiped you out in Scotland are going to come back. Or the 1 million who voted for the Greens are going to come back. Or even the 4 million who voted UKIP are going to come back. Sure, we have profound disagreements with UKIP, but what they in part reflect is a rejection of the mainstream political parties and the political system that we have. And when you've got a parliament full of expenses cheats who spend more time filling in their expenses forms than they do looking after the people, how can anyone blame the public for having such a poor view of politicians? I'm not an ordinary politician, Hafsa, to answer your question. Respect is not an ordinary movement. Nobody listens to me and thinks he's just like all the rest. That's why the media hates me so much. Because I'm not an expenses thief. Because I never betrayed the public. Because I never lied to the public. Because I told the truth as I saw it on every issue to the public. That's why the media hates me. So, if I'm elected with Max at my right hand, everything's going to change. You've heard it. Believe it.
This one is more detailed. It's from Nick Smart from Southwark. Does the city need any more runways? If so, where would you build one?
Oh, runways. Well, I like airplanes. I like aviation. I like airports. And I think the airports provide well-paid, trade unionized jobs in very large numbers in a way that very, very few other employers now do. But the West of London cannot afford more aviation over it. The pollution of the air, the noise, the disruption is already at breaking point. I believe we need a new runway, and I believe it should be at London Gatwick. I think that Gatwick is the best solution for the perceived and I think real shortage of aviation space in the country. And they don't have votes in the London Mayoralty.
I know you've gone into your plan for housing crisis, but these are a few questions that have come up once again. So if you could just detail a bit more about what you'd like to do about, what you can do, what you're planning to do about the housing crisis, that would be great.
Well, I did say that 50% of any development, and the mayor has this power, people have to submit planning applications for these developments to the Mayor of London. And any developer who hears about this meeting should know that I am serious. Ken was serious too, but he was unable to implement the 50% mark. Boris was not serious, cut it to 25, and achieved less than 10%. But there's another issue. What do they mean by affordable housing? They mean 80% of market rents. I believe it should be 50% of market rents. 50% of market rents, 50% of all development has to be affordable housing. Compulsory purchase of these, by the way, it's at least 200,000. 200,000 houses have been bought by rich foreigners who never live in them, who have bought them only to lock up their money away from the police force in their own country in some cases. We can't accept that. So if you don't live in the house, don't buy one. If you're not going to live in it, don't buy one. If you do buy one and you don't live in it, we're going to compulsory purchase it. That's my plan. Well, I don't know if the implication of your question is that I have anything to do with the Qataris. I'm not even allowed to go to Qatar. I'm banned from Qatar. I'm banned from Qatar. But they're not banned. They're not banned from London, and nobody is banned from London. Anybody can come to London, and anybody can invest in London. But if the Qataris or anybody else want to build housing developments, then 50% of the units will have to be affordable housing. There'll be no special deal for the royal family of Qatar. None at all.
George, again, I know you've touched a lot on taxi drivers, and I know it's something that's very close to your heart, but quite a few questions have touched on that. So if there's anything else you'd like to add, because we've got quite a touching question here from a mother who studied 4 years for knowledge, and obviously who's very scared of what's going to happen next. So
yeah, I mean, I think that London cabs are crucial to London. I think a London without cabs is like the Tower of London without ravens. I believe that London has a stamp, has a brand, and the black cabs are part of that brand. I have never found a black cab driver without something to say. I spent 7 years on TalkSport radio every Friday and Saturday night, and practically every London cab driver listened to my show, even if they hated me, and some of them did, even if it infuriated them. And my daughter, who was then very young, now the mother of 4, said to me once, "Daddy, cab drivers are very clever men." I think she meant they had a lot to say. And historically, of course, they have and do. And I think that getting into a car, knowing that the person driving it has had their vehicle checked, a vehicle that must be up to standard, a driver who must be of good character, is really, really important. It's really, really important. Especially, I wouldn't want my wife or my daughter to get into a car where none of those things were guaranteed. I really wouldn't. And I think that we have a responsibility to make sure that at least the cab drivers are on a level playing field with the Uber drivers. Well, Uber are. Uber were very clever. They hired Rachel Whetstone, the former head of public relations for Google. And while I'm on that subject, tax-dodging corporations in London will find it very difficult to deal with me. Very, very difficult to deal with me. We might have to look at how much they're paying to get their waste removed. They might have to look at how much waste they're producing and where it goes. They might find that collecting their garbage becomes very, very expensive indeed, unless they start paying tax, unless they start exercising their social responsibility. But back to Rachel Whetstone and Google. Now, who's she? First of all, in her own right, she's a leading member of the Conservative Party. She's married to David Cameron's former, long-time head of communications and a key Cameron campaigner. Boris Johnson said that Cameron told him to leave Uber alone. And he did leave Uber alone. Well, David Cameron will never tell me what to do. If he tells me to leave somebody alone, I'm more likely to pay them a very great deal of attention indeed. So, I'm not suggesting personal corruption here, heaven forfend, that Cameron would ever be involved in anything like that. They love Uber, as I say, because it's the kind of capitalism they believe in. They don't believe in red tape. They don't believe in regulation. They don't believe in health and safety. We had to fight the Tories. I was one of those doing the fighting to get a corporate manslaughter bill through Parliament that would allow the prosecution of company directors for negligence in their companies that led to public harm. The Tories don't believe in all of that. They just don't believe in it. So Uber is the way they would like the whole economy to be, where nobody is anybody's brother or sister. Everybody is everybody's competitor. Throat-cutting, no rules, bare-fisted, no Marquis of Queensberry, no ring, no ban on the feet, the elbow, or anything else. That's what they believe in. This is a key point that I'm glad you've reminded me of. You see, heckling can be a very good thing. Somebody said earlier, well, Uber are cheaper. Of course they're cheaper. This is a $40 billion US corporation. It's a loss leader for them. What's the 40 billion for? It's to drive out the competition and get a monopoly. And once they've got a monopoly, see how cheap it will be then, once there's nobody else to compete with them. That's why the cab companies, who were mortal enemies for decades to the black cabs, have now joined forces with the black cabs to reject this throat-cutting model that Uber represents. Did I deal with that question? Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, I think that's just, I'll tell you what, I'll take a question from the floor, you gentlemen.
Yeah, my name's Ian Puddick. I've been arrested many times by the counter-terrorism police.
Oh my goodness.
On my website, police expenses, I won all my cases. The question is, they're a bit like the bankers, they're not accountable. How would you make the police more accountable to the public?
Well, when a man at your campaign launch opens his contribution by saying, I've been arrested many times by the anti-terrorism police, you get a bit nervous. And then I recognized you. You are one of the celebrated victims of the abuse of police power. Ian Puddick, look him up. And I helped you in your hour of need. There you go. I'm often the only one. I'm often the only one. I'm not against the police. I must say, in my life in London, which is almost 35 years, my experience with the Metropolitan Police has been invariably, with only one exception, when a senior official of the anti-terrorism squad was sleeping in my bed without my knowledge. But that's another story. That's another story. But my experience with the police in London has been invariably good. But then I was a well-known white man with blue eyes. I'm acutely aware that not everybody has had that experience with the Metropolitan Police. But I'm not against the police because it's working people and poor people who need police the most. Most of the crime, whether violence or theft or robbery, burglary, car theft, every crime you can imagine, by definition, most of the people who are suffering it are working class people. So I'll back the police as long as they treat every Londoner the same. That's the key point. And I'll want to know, what are the police response times in Mayfair compared to the police response times on the Walworth Road? And if they're not comparable, I want to know why. And the commissioner, if he's listening, I'm sure there's a police officer here in the meeting. I saw one or two characters at the back that I thought might be police officers, so I'm sure he'll get a report. I'm not here to make trouble for you, but I am here to make sure that you serve all Londoners and all areas of London equally. That's the pledge that I am making. I'm going to be asking difficult questions. I'm going to be asking, how come in a city like London, where 53% of the people are not white or are from other visible minorities, how come so few of the police officers are? How come those that are at the top of the tree in the police force look so unlike the population of London? Now, I don't mean by that a white police officer is inherently, in any sense, weaker or less just than a black police officer. There's some rogues have been black police officers, as you know, and some gems are white police officers. But if a police force bears no resemblance to the community it's policing, that's asking for trouble. And I'm sure that the commissioner would agree with me on that. He would no doubt say that he's trying. Well, he needs to try harder. And if he wants, I'll lead a recruitment drive for black and minority ethnic police officers to join the force. But if they do, we've got to be sure that they won't suffer from that institutionalized racism that the Macpherson report told us was present in the Metropolitan Police.
Great. This question actually is for Max. So, Max, what experience will you bring to the handling of the London budget when you come aboard?
My experience. Well, I've been in the industry, finance industry, for 30 years. I started out on Wall Street. I created a company in Los Angeles where I invented technology, including the only patented technology for virtual currencies, prediction markets. I, of course, have been active in the media space, covering financial shenanigans. But I guess the key part of my experience would be that I guess I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper, in that my experience on Wall Street, where I firsthand engaged in so many of the skullduggery that we still see active today. So I'm able to identify these crimes pretty easily and communicate to those who need to be informed of exactly what's going on and how best to eradicate in a way that's either involving countermeasures in the financial markets to neutralize the abuse and the malfeasance, or to make a criminal referral to the appropriate organization and to write that up according to the specifics of the crime being done. What the problem is today is that so often, it's particularly in the media space, there's not really enough literacy, financial literacy, even to I was amazed. I saw someone tweeting on this. This could have been just but what I understood to have happened on the BBC Question Time recently is that David Dimbleby asked, quote, "What is fractional reserve banking?" as part of a question and answer, which to me is shocking. That would be like Mary Berry saying, "What is an apple pie?" You know, it's so fundamentally basic to how the system works that to have someone of that stature admit that they have no idea how it works and what goes on is, I think, emblematic of the big problem here, is that in the media space, you have financial illiteracy. Even in the political space, you have financial illiteracy. Mark Carney, governor of the Bank of England, says things that are shockingly incorrect. And it relates to his description of things like deflation and inflation. He uses these terms in a way that anyone who's had any training at all in economics and finance find laughably appalling and misinformed. But he has a political agenda, and the media in this country follows suit because they also have a political agenda. I do not think of the BBC as impartial. Yeah. In my experience doing television for networks all over the world, I would say that the BBC is probably the least impartial news organization in the world. And the country is suffering as a result of it. Now, with George Galloway running for mayor and becoming mayor of London and putting something like this at the forefront of his campaign, we're going to really turn up the heat on those in the City of London who are continuing to commit acts of financial fraud, malfeasance, and showcasing this in a way that people hopefully will get through that barrier of financial illiteracy and bring it down to common sense. My basic description of what's happening in the City of London with the big four banks and the big four accountancy firms, KPMG, Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCooper, and there's a fourth, Deloitte. What goes on between those four consultants and those four big banks is nothing short of racketeering. It's organized crime. It's a racket. It needs to be prosecuted as a racket. This is one of the problems that you have, is that cases are prosecuted one at a time, And just like in America, we had this similar with organized crime. It wasn't until it was finally the FBI and these other law agencies figured out that they needed to go after it as a racket under RICO, is what they call in the U.S. This is the approach that needs to be taken. They need to be all gone after as an organized crime racket. And I think that's where we'll make some headway. And the results will be startling. You'll see, it'll be a boost to the non-financialized economy. The financialized economy dominates the overall economy in an extraordinarily unhealthy way. The only thing in nature that grows as quickly as the financial sector in this country is cancer. And that's not something you want in any economy. That growth rate of financialization, privatization, securitization, and fraud needs to be eradicated.
I think you'll agree that's
Can
sorry.
I add something?
Yeah, of course.
Iceland threw the bankers in jail, and Iceland this week became the first country in the world to reach figures of output higher than they were before the crash. But nobody has gone to jail in the city of London. Even when the banks 2 weeks ago were fined $7 billion. $7 billion for fraud. No person was charged. Now, can you imagine a theft of £7,000? Nobody personally gets punished for it. But that's what happened with those that were rigging markets for personal gain just a couple of weeks ago. I talked about the corporate manslaughter bill that I was deeply involved in. A phrase I coined at the time was this: not until the first company director goes to jail for the negligence of their company will you force companies to make sure there's no negligence. And I believe the same thing about the finance sector.
I believe the gentleman at the back wants to say something. Hang on a second, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. George Galloway, comrades, friends, pleased to be here today. My name is Councillor Olio Rahman. I was the first Respect Councillor in the country. And it's an honor and a privilege to come and support somebody who's given birth to me in politics. And because of this man, I am standing here today, and I am who I am today. So I salute you, sir, for your courage and for your support and that you have given. And when he was Member of Parliament for Bethnal Green and Bow, because of George, we had first Bangladeshi Member of Parliament in the country, but unfortunately we had the wrong Bangladeshi member of, and in his own words, we had the wrong Bangladeshi Member of Parliament in Bethnal Green Bow, because she's nothing but the puppet. But one thing I want to ask you, George, that I'm sure you'll get asked by many people, if you become the mayor of London, as you would know from our own experience in Tower Hamlets, you are quite easily isolated by the establishment and right-wing media in this country. How would you tackle the right-wing media and the aggression that you're going to face from them? And also, throughout London, all the London boroughs will be either Labour or Conservative, and how would you tackle those local authorities to make sure that they listen to you as Mayor of London and work with you?
Thank you very much. Councillor Oliur Rahman was the very first ever Respect Councillor elected in Britain. He became the Deputy Mayor of Tower Hamlets. I'm very proud of him. I regard him as my son. I didn't see you, Ollie, in the crowd. Forgive me for that. But the point that you make is a powerful one. And the only answer to the destabilization, subversion of the ruling elite and its media echo chambers is democracy. And Councillor Rabina last Thursday, despite months of unremitting smear and slander, came within 1,400 votes of being the leading candidate in the first ballot for mayor. And I think that the people of Tower Hamlets will come to realize, and quite quickly, that the person they did elect by a narrow majority will not do anything for them, will not achieve the things that you achieved. The only borough paying EMA, education maintenance allowance, the only borough refusing academies and free schools and supporting the public school system, and all the other things that you achieved will come to be looked on as a golden age. I will try, if I'm elected mayor, through a system of town meetings, town hall meetings, opening the city hall, bringing in the people, to build such a mass base for the mayoralty and what we're doing that no judge or Queen's Counsel or newspaper editor will dream that they can bring it down. But if they bring it down, our mayoralty will be looked back on as a golden age also. Politics is a struggle, and I've been struggling in politics for 40 years, more than 40 years. I fought my first election in 1964. Our house was dark because every window was covered by big posters of Harold Wilson. Somebody asked me actually tonight, who's Harold Wilson? I must be becoming a veteran. Let's go with Labour was Harold's slogan. The white hot heat of the technological revolution. That's how far back in politics I go. And every inch has been a struggle. I defeated Roy Jenkins, one of the biggest figures in post-war British politics, to take his seat from him in 1987 in Glasgow Hillhead. You can't actually fight more of an establishment figure than the late Roy Jenkins. But I fought him and I won. And I, with your help, took on in Bethnal Green and Bow one of the most celebrated Blair babes. It's not my phrase, their phrase. Blair babes, Una King, now Baroness King. The one thing is, when you get defeated by me, you automatically go to the House of Lords. So perhaps the Labour and Conservative and Liberal Democrats will take note. Every inch has been a struggle. When I won the Bradford West by-election 3 years ago, it was one of the biggest political upsets, perhaps the biggest political upset in a century of British politics. I have a long track record of taking the fight to those who oppress us, those who exploit us. And I'm proud of what I have achieved. But there would be no greater achievement than to win this and build a people's London, a London for all that would be looked back on by succeeding generations as a really fine thing that London achieved.